My roommate's Karen mom demanded I move out so her daughter could have the entire apartment. I got them both evicted instead. I, 30, male, rent a modest two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of a college town. I work as an assistant manager at a local retail store. Nothing fancy, but it keeps me afloat. The place suits me well, a short distance from shops, yet quiet enough for a decent night's rest. Initially, I lived here with a friend who moved out unexpectedly, forcing me to find a new tenant to share expenses. That's how my current roommate came along, through a mutual acquaintance. I figured it would be fine. In hindsight, I had no idea the storm that was about to erupt. She was a couple of years younger than me, juggling part-time work at a cafe and night classes. For simplicity, I'll call her my roommate. She brought just a few boxes when she moved in, assuring me she'd always pay her share of rent and utilities promptly. For the first few weeks, we coexisted fairly well, sharing the kitchen, occasionally discussing our days, and generally giving each other space. It seemed promising. But then her mother arrived for a weekend visit, and I quickly discovered how an overbearing parent could turn a peaceful arrangement into an escalating nightmare. Her mother's initial visits were unremarkable. She'd show up, perch on a couch, and comment on everything from our wall art to the brand of cleaning products we used. I tried to let it roll off my back. Soon, her visits became more frequent. She'd stop by unannounced, rummaging through cupboards and sighing dramatically if she found items she disapproved of. My roommate brushed it off, claiming her mother had quirks. I sensed something worse brewing. Little did I know her mother would soon demand that I vacate the apartment entirely so her daughter could enjoy the space alone. One day, I came home to see her mother pulling out my jacket and boots from the hall closet, tossing them aside like garbage. She turned to me and said, "My daughter's cramped in here. You should move these things so she has more room." Shocked, I told her she had no right to rearrange my belongings. She muttered that I was selfish. My roommate emerged, offering a weak apology, but never telling her mother to back off. From that moment, I realized a real clash loomed. This woman clearly believed she could dominate my household. Her complaints multiplied. She didn't like my music, my cooking style, or the hours I kept. Some days, it felt like she practically lived in our apartment instead of my roommate. I attempted a calm talk with my roommate, requesting we set boundaries. She looked uneasy, mumbling that her mother was just protective and hated confrontation. I tried to explain this wasn't a minor dispute. It felt like an invasion. My frustration grew as I realized they wanted me marginalized. It seemed each interaction was engineered to push me closer to leaving. I suspected they had bigger plans afoot. All doubts vanished when her mother cornered me in the kitchen one afternoon. She insisted my roommate needed the entire apartment because she was a young woman on the rise, whereas I was some old-timer holding her back. Dumbfounded, I reminded her we both signed the lease, and I had no intention of leaving. She rolled her eyes, claiming she'd spoken to management, who supposedly agreed I should vacate. This raised red flags. I decided to visit the property manager for clarification. Something about her bold, confident lie made me suspect she was either delusional or planning something drastic. On Monday, I spoke with the leasing office. The manager was perplexed by the mother's statement and confirmed nobody had asked for my removal. In fact, as both my roommate and I were listed on the lease, we had equal rights to remain. Relieved, I went home ready to confront my roommate. But the mother was already there, this time rummaging through bathroom drawers. I told her the manager said we were both entitled to live here. She sneered, accusing me of making trouble and promising I'd regret defying her. That threat, coming from someone so brazen, made me uneasy. I tried talking to my roommate, asking why her mother acted like the landlord. She shrugged, saying that's just how she is. I pressed, but she's literally throwing my stuff around and telling me to move out. We need to set limits. My roommate looked uncomfortable. Finally, she admitted, "Mom thinks it's better if I have the place alone. She says you'll leave eventually if we apply enough pressure." Hearing that from my roommate's own mouth flipped a switch inside me. They were indeed conspiring to edge me out. I decided then and there I wouldn't be bullied. More incidents piled on. The mother switched the TV to her favorite shows, ignoring me if I was watching something. She reorganized the kitchen cabinets, placing my dishes on the highest shelves as if to imply I didn't belong. She even moved my toothbrush to a corner on the bathroom sink, complaining I contaminated her daughter's area. Each attempt to push me out only strengthened my resolve. I started documenting everything: snide remarks, moments she barged in, and interactions with my roommate. My plan wasn't fully formed yet, but I knew I'd need evidence if things escalated legally. Sure enough, the mother's tactics escalated. She pounded on my bedroom door at odd hours, complaining of strange odors or weird noises, as if I were doing something illegal. My roommate apologized weakly, but it was obvious she feared her mother more than she cared about fairness. One evening, I overheard the mother on the phone. "Yes, I'll talk to them. Don't worry. We'll get rid of him soon." That was the final straw. I felt a surge of determination to fight back properly. If they wanted me gone, I'd show them I wasn't the easiest target. I reviewed the lease thoroughly. I noted all rules about visitors, noise violations, and responsibilities. My roommate and I were co-tenants, each paying half the rent. The mother was not on the lease, and her constant presence was a gray area. The lease limited extended stays by non-tenants, requiring management's approval if someone stayed more than 2 weeks. That gave me an idea. She'd been crashing here nearly every day for well over a month. Clearly, she was violating the terms. If I could prove she was essentially living here without permission, management might take action. I began collecting dated notes, screenshots of the mother's attempts to control the common areas, and even took photos of her personal items strewn around the living space. On top of that, I spoke with neighbors who confirmed she was frequently around, sometimes more than my roommate. Armed with this, I returned to the property manager. He listened carefully as I explained how this unauthorized occupant was practically running the apartment. By then, he'd also received noise complaints from other tenants about the mother's loud late-night arguments. The manager frowned, saying this was a serious breach of contract. The manager explained the process. They'd send a formal notice about unauthorized occupancy, giving a deadline for the mother to vacate or be added to the lease. If my roommate and her mother failed to comply, the lease could be terminated. I thanked him and left, feeling a surge of relief. But that very afternoon, I found the mother in the hallway, tearing down some of my personal photos I'd hung outside my room. She glared at me, smirking. "Don't get too comfortable. You won't be here much longer," she threatened. She had no idea I'd already set the wheels in motion. My roommate confronted me that evening, claiming I'd betrayed them by talking to management. I calmly reminded her that it was her mother who refused to respect boundaries, reorganized my stuff, and lied about management wanting me gone. She demanded to know why I couldn't just leave and be the bigger person. I refused. "I pay rent, and I have every right to stay," I told her. She stormed off, clearly angry that her plan hadn't worked. I suspected her mother had twisted the story to paint me as the villain standing in the way of her daughter's comfort. A few days later, the formal warning arrived. The manager delivered a notice stating that an unauthorized occupant must either vacate or become an official leaseholder, subject to the usual background checks and additional rent. My roommate complained bitterly, but her mother was livid. She cornered me in the kitchen again, hurling insults and vowing she'd get me out first. Her arrogance astonished me. She seemed to think she could bully the landlord into submission the same way she tried with me. When the manager refused to budge, she threatened a lawsuit, shouting about violations of her family's rights. I decided to keep my distance. The mother escalated by messing with my personal items, spilling salt into my cereal box, removing the batteries from my remote, and once even turning off the main power switch to my room. Each time I logged it. I also installed a small camera in my bedroom for protection. Then one afternoon, she went too far. She tossed my laptop onto the living room floor, insisting I had left it in her way. Fortunately, it wasn't badly damaged, but I photographed the scene, saving yet more evidence of her destructive behavior. The manager, upon hearing these updates, said he would move to terminate the lease entirely if the mother didn't leave. My roommate now faced a choice: either push her mother out or risk losing the apartment for both of us. During one tense conversation, she admitted she was torn. Her mother had promised to pay for some of her college expenses if she gained sole control of the unit. This was the crux of it. They wanted me gone so my roommate could pretend to live alone, thereby saving face or fulfilling her mother's demands. It was manipulative and cruel. Weeks passed, and the mother stayed put despite the notice. She arrogantly believed she could outmaneuver us. The manager filed an official eviction warning, listing both my roommate and me as tenants in violation because the mother was essentially living there unauthorized. Panicked, my roommate begged her mother to comply. But the mother only doubled down, ranting that nobody would dare evict us if they knew what was good for them. She was playing a game of chicken with the landlord, but she had no legal footing. I watched the spectacle, knowing I'd done everything by the book. Eventually, management scheduled a final inspection, warning that if the mother was still found living there, they'd proceed with eviction. My roommate tried to hide her mother's belongings in closets or pack them into her car temporarily. I kept my camera rolling, capturing the comedic extremes they went to, stuffing clothes and toiletries into suitcases, hoping to fool the inspector. But the inspector saw through the ruse, noticing the mother's frequent comings and goings. Neighbors also corroborated her near-constant presence. That sealed their fate. The manager told me privately that an eviction notice was inevitable if the mother didn't vanish. On the morning of the final decision, I came home to find the mother in the hallway, screaming into her phone, threatening to sue the landlord for harassment. My roommate, red-faced, was frantically packing a bag. The official eviction notice arrived later that day, naming both tenants, my roommate and me, for violating the lease by housing an unauthorized occupant who refused to leave. Management intended to vacate the entire apartment, forcing both of us out. While that sounded terrible, I wasn't caught off guard. The manager had already explained that if one tenant breaks the agreement, both can be penalized. I had a conversation with a manager about my options. Given all the documentation of my attempts to rectify the situation, he was sympathetic. He mentioned I could formally reapply for a separate lease once the current arrangement was void. Essentially, they'd evict us, then let me sign a new lease for the same unit after the mother and roommate were out. It was a neat trick, but it required me to endure the official eviction process on paper. I agreed, relieved to know I'd be able to stay while the others would be forced to leave. When my roommate and her mother received the final notice, chaos erupted. The mother shrieked about injustice, calling the landlord every name under the sun. My roommate sobbed, blaming me for not caving to their demands. But no amount of blame could undo their blatant disregard for the lease rules or the manager's repeated warnings. Over the next few days, they scrambled to find a new place, complaining loudly about incompetent landlords and ungrateful roommates. I stayed out of their way, quietly preparing for the transition. The official eviction date arrived. Management sent staff to ensure they vacated. The mother, still defiant, cursed at everyone and threatened legal action that never materialized. My roommate looked utterly defeated. As they loaded their belongings into a truck, she glared at me, muttering that she hoped I was happy. In truth, I felt a mix of relief and satisfaction. Their months of harassment ended up costing them the apartment they tried to claim for themselves. By mid-afternoon, they were gone, and the locks were changed. A couple of days later, the manager and I finalized my new lease. He praised my patience, saying he'd rarely seen someone handle so much aggravation without snapping. I admitted it wasn't easy, but I was glad justice prevailed. In a matter of hours, I went from facing forced eviction to legally holding the apartment on my own. The mother and my roommate's manipulative tactics had backfired spectacularly, leaving them with nothing but regrets and presumably a frantic search for alternative housing. I spent the following week restoring order, moving my furniture back to where I liked it, and discarding the remnants they left behind. The quiet was surreal after the constant drama. Neighbors who'd heard the arguments congratulated me, sharing their relief that the crazy lady was gone. Some even recalled her banging on their doors, demanding they keep noise down for her daughter's sake, another testament to her entitlement. With each new day, I savored the peaceful atmosphere they had tried to destroy. Reflecting on the ordeal, I realized how entitlement can twist people's perceptions of fairness. The mother believed so fervently that her daughter deserved everything that she trampled on basic respect. My roommate went along, lured by the promise of a free ride. But in the end, their manipulative plan collapsed under its own weight. The price they paid, losing the apartment entirely, was a direct result of their refusal to follow simple rules. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people hoist themselves with their own petard. Now, living alone in the apartment I fought to keep, I feel more confident standing up for my rights. I learned an important lesson. If you document everything, follow the proper channels, and remain firm in the face of intimidation, you can prevail. My ex-roommate and her mother discovered this the hard way. ending up with an eviction on their record because they couldn't respect boundaries. While it wasn't my original plan to get them evicted, it was the inevitable outcome of their own actions. In hindsight, their attempt to oust me ended up destroying their own security. In the end, I decided not to dwell on resentment. Dealing with that much negativity was draining enough. Now, I use the living room without interruption, watch what I want on TV, and store my belongings wherever I please. No one barges in to rearrange my closet or belittle my choices. It's a huge relief. Whenever I sense a guest acting pushy, I remember how quickly toxic behavior can escalate. I'm much quicker to assert boundaries, no longer timid about claiming my own space. After all, I earned it, inch by inch, argument by argument, until justice was served.